So does anybody here watch when Shark Week comes on? Is anybody familiar with Shark Week? Yeah, some people like Shark Week. Okay. You know, when I was a kid, I absolutely loved sharks. I had sharks painted on my walls, and I had posters of them and stuffed animals and all that. I've always liked sharks. So this summer, when a movie came out called Meg, I went to see it. Has anybody seen Meg? Okay, good. Only one person. It was that bad. Okay, so I don't really recommend it, but it was a big blockbuster movie that came out this summer, and Meg is short, I learned, for megalodon, which was this giant prehistoric shark that lived at the time of the dinosaurs and was apparently the size of multiple whales put together, top of the food chain. And the conceit of this movie is that there are parts of the oceans that we human beings have not explored, the very depths, which is true. So of course, some human beings go down to the depths of the ocean, and one of these megalodons happens to be living there still and follows them up to the surface, wreaking havoc. You know, kind of the rest of the movie sort of becomes like Jaws, but with lots of comedy thrown in, actually. So I don't know. It was what was that? It was kind of a funny. It really was. It was kind of a funny Jaws. They were self-conscious about what they were doing, I think. It was interesting because there seemed to be this incredible trepidation and fear of sort of what nature and animals can do to human beings, threaded throughout this entire movie. And I was thinking of two things from that. The first is that I think there was more than a little bit of projection that was going on there, right? If anything, I don't think that it's nature and animals that are a threat to human beings. I think it's human beings that have become a threat to animals, and extinction of species and global warming and all of that stuff. But the other thing that I was thinking about as I watched this movie and afterwards is that there seemed to be this dynamic through the film where you were either predator or prey. And that was kind of the whole thing. You were either the human beings were worried that they were going to become the victims of this shark, or they were chasing the shark, and the shark was potentially going to be the victim of these human beings. And it started to escalate throughout the film and become not only a dynamic that was happening between the human beings and this giant animal that they're trying to trace, but it also started to become a dynamic between the human beings, where they started to treat each other like either predator or prey. There was this guy who funded the entire project, and he really sort of used people only as a means to an end, and when their safety was in jeopardy, he just really kind of pushed that aside and ignored it, and was as long as I'm able to, make the maximum profit off of this, I'm not going to worry about that. And what sparked for me after I watched this really pretty silly movie, I mean, it's, not some deep philosophical film, but what sparked for me is that I think that the way that we treat nature and treat animals has a direct impact on how we treat each other. And I think the reverse of that is true as well. How we see other human beings and interact with other human beings also spills out into our relation with the wider world. There's a wonderful book that I read back in the 8th grade, and images of it just have stuck with me, and I decided this week I was going to pick it up and read it again. Short book, but just beautiful young adult fiction. It's called Bless the Beasts and Children by Glendon Swarthout. I see a few people nodding, familiar with this wonderful novel. And in this novel, it takes on this similar notion, but from another angle, what it talks about, the story that it tells, is that this group of boys goes to spend the summer out in Arizona, and there's this cowboy camp, and they're really bad at all of it. Like they can't really ride the horses, they can't compete in the competitions. They're just, they're constantly sort of falling to the bottom of the ranks, and there's sort of this rigid hierarchy in the camp of, who's the most successful archers and campers, and then the ones who are not are kind of the outcasts and the excluded. And the outcasts and the excluded in this is what the novel focuses on. And these boys in the camp really start to look out for one another in the course of this novel unfolding. And about midway through, they discover that there is a range near them where buffalo are kept. And they make a point to tell their counselor that they want to go see these buffalo. And they just want to witness these, majestic beasts that are, this really symbol of America in a lot of ways. And they want to go see them. So they're taken out to see these buffalo. And unfortunately, they arrive at a point when there's going to be something called the thinning of the herd. And it's some of this novel, which is a young adult novel, it's quite brutal in some ways, and some of the images really stick with you. Some of it's quite hard to read. And I won't get too far into that. We're all ages today. You can read it on your own. But as the boys witness this, they experience this incredible compassion for these majestic, gentle beasts that are in grave danger. And they learn that only half of them are going to be thinned on this day they go to see it. And then they make a pact with one another that night they're going to go back to the camp and find a way to lead the buffalo out of the fenced-in range and set them free. And the rest of the novel is about them trying to execute this plan to release these beautiful, majestic beasts. And what really strikes me in this novel is that they're really the only part of the novel where human beings are evidenced as being caring and compassionate towards one another is in this group of boys. And they also have this sort of compassionate relationship with these buffalo and want to protect them and care for them. And the rest of the people in the novel don't really care about the buffalo, and they're not particularly nice to each other either. There's this sort of reflectivity. It's almost like, looking at a mirror. We human beings look at nature and we see a particular thing. Either we see sort of predator and prey dynamic, or we see this thing that needs to be conquered and slaughtered, and then we turn to each other and start doing the same thing. Or we see something that's majestic and beautiful that needs appreciation, and then we turn towards each other and start doing that too. And I would just suggest that there is some actual evidence to back this up too. It's not only something that you find in novels and in literary stories. There's statistics out and research that's been done that some of the farming industries that treat animals the worst are also the ones who will treat their workers the worst. There is real evidence that the way that we perceive nature and the animal kingdom and how we interact and treat them has a direct impact on how we are going to treat each other. Right now, there's a conversation that's happening in Unitarian Universalism. Some of you might know about this. But it's whether or not we should change the first principle, which is the most beloved principle for many Unitarian Universalists. It's about the inherent worth and dignity of every human being. And the conversation is whether we should change it to the inherent worth and dignity of all beings. And I think that there's a good conversation to be had about this. Some people say that it might dilute some of the work for human rights that we've been doing. And there might be something to that, and I think a really robust conversation should happen around this. But I also think that the way that human rights and human beings are treated is not fully disentangled from the way that we treat the rest of beings in this world. I think there is a deeply reciprocal relationship between those things. And as we have that conversation, I think that that's something that we should remember. So let us bless the beasts and children, and particularly the beasts that have arrived among us today. And thank you all for joining for this wonderful circus of a service.